Alright, I think we're recording here. So, as many of my subscribers and the people who listen to this channel, listen to me talk about cigars might know, is that usually I review basically Cuban cigars. So I have a whole bunch of reviews of Cuban cigars. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Okay? I'm going to talk about a very special, incredible type of tobacco that is grown in a very special place in the Connecticut River Valley in the U.S. That is really an amazing type of tobacco that I would recommend you got anybody out there to go and try to find and check out, because it is a dying business. It's on its last legs. The production of U.S. Connecticut Shade Tobacco is almost non-existent. I mean, it's getting very rare. And U.S. Connecticut Shade is a tobacco that has an extremely rich history with an extremely rich aroma that it puts off. It's famous for its mellow character. It's smooth. It feels good through the nose. The wrappers are just thin and silky when they're harvested from the plant. It's just a beautiful thing that's gonna be lost, in the next few years, and it's really running low. So I'm gonna talk about Connecticut Shade Tobacco and how it was, the history about it, and about, in relation with cigars, and go over some of the history. And I'm going to smoke this Connecticut Shade, old vintage, 15-year-old vintage Connecticut Shade wrapped, beautiful looking cigar here that I've had in my humidor for 15 years. It's some kind of a Gordo. It says Connecticut #1 Grand Habano, and it has a green and gold band on the foot. And I don't really know, I don't remember buying it, but this is an old Connecticut Shade cigar. They're getting very hard to find. And one thing you're gonna immediately notice about Connecticut Shade is they got a little oil sheen, and they're very papery and light colored wrappers because they're so thin. And the smells that they give off are just very fresh. Sometimes you can get some vanilla, just fresh tobacco. It just smells very fresh. It's a mild smoke, and I would highly recommend it. So I'm going to smoke this right now and talk a little bit about the history, and then finally I'm going to stick around because I'm going to give some recommendations of some really good American Connecticut Shade cigars that are using like double Connecticut's from the USA. US Connecticut Shade. And there's a whole bunch of Connecticut Shade cigars out there. They're called Shade or Connecticut. And those cigars are not grown in the United States, so it's a totally different location. They're grown in a totally different place, usually in Ecuador. And, we'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit about that later. So, Connecticut Shade, like I was saying, is a beautiful cigar. When I lived in the States, it was one of my favorite types of cigars. I've always loved them. And always just a beautiful smoke. And this one here is very old, so cut it up and then start puffing on this thing. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the history. Just a very smooth, Barney flavor through the pre-draw. It's just that American draw, you know. It's very, loose draw. And aged Connecticut's, they really lose their nicotine. So I know this isn't going to blast me away with nicotine. So it's just it's a real shame that this is happening, but I recommend anybody to go out and get some US Connecticut Shade cigars because they are awesome. They're delicious. They have a very old tradition. Just famous for that rich earthiness. It's one of those things like it really reminds me of Cuban cigars. And some Connecticut seed is being grown in Cuba right now. Interestingly enough. Very mellow, just very, very flavorful, sweet, earthy, rich cigar here. Some coffee, some cocoa bean, some bean flavors in here. Rich and delicious. A little creamy. Yeah, very, very nice. So going into the history here of Connecticut Shade Tobacco. Of course, the Indians were growing it before the Europeans came to the North England, Connecticut area. So the Europeans got there in the 1600s. And let's see here, in the 1640s, the Windsor city or Windsor town in Connecticut on the Connecticut River Valley was established. And almost immediately they started growing tobacco there. So they must have learned how to do it from the native people, that were growing it before they got there. And it was of exceedingly high quality, much better than the Virginia barley and the later Kentucky tobaccos, and everything in that area was a shit, but the Connecticut was really good. So it became like a very, awesome staple crop up into the 1700s, where Connecticut tobacco, at that time it was called shoestring tobacco. And it was just fertile soil, Windsor soil. The glaciated Connecticut soil there was amazing to grow tobacco. So they were just shipping it all out to Europe. I mean, Europe was a huge customer of Connecticut tobacco, 1700s. And then in the early 1800s is when they first started developing the shade process. So they had this muslin tents that were hand woven by all these women that would weave all this fucking fabric and make these huge tents and put them on these cedar poles, and then grow the tobacco under these shaded tents in the Windsor soil. And it just, the leaves, the wrappers, the leaves for the wrappers just were amazing. It was the best quality wrappers that were grown for about 100 years. And they became famous. And production peaked in the 1920s at, I think it was 25,000 acres of Connecticut Shade tobacco was being grown and produced and shipped and sold out into the world. 1920s. Well, from that point it started to decline. And it's been declining ever since. And it's declined all the way down to 2,000 acres. That's all that's left here in 2020. And looks like it's gonna go all out of business. I mean, it's real estate development. They're just selling farms. They're just cutting everything out, and taxes are high in Connecticut. It's hard to do business, and so the government's just destroying it all. Cigarette and tobacco taxes everywhere, and trying to kill industries. And they're just gonna turn the whole fucking thing into a big casino. They're gonna dump concrete on those tobacco fields. Windsor soil, which is a glaciated ancient soil of that valley that is so rich in nutrients, that for a 400-year tradition of growing tobacco there is going to be destroyed in the next few years. It's a real fucking shame, And so we gotta get demand. We gotta save these farmers. We gotta save the Connecticut Windsor soil. How are we gonna do that? Go out and buy some of these Connecticut Shade cigars. U.S. grown Connecticut Shade cigars. They are awesome. Cocoa bean, hints of vanilla, some raisin from the smoke that's wafting in the air. Very mild, just a very pleasant smoke. And they're cheap, Well, I don't know, maybe not anymore. They were when I was buying them 15 years ago, but now they're getting harder to find. And what you're gonna see is a lot of American cigars are gonna say Connecticut, 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 but that's not U.S. Connecticut Shade Tobacco. It's Ecuadorian Connecticut Seed Tobacco. It's not the same thing. It tastes totally different. Ecuadorian tobacco is much stronger. It's a little bit spicy. I mean, it's not grown under tints. It's grown under cloud cover. That's the shade. So the conditions are all different. The soil is different. The flavors are all different. I mean, if maybe some people like Ecuadorian, Connecticut wrapper, and it's good, but this is something that's special here, and it's going to die out because Ecuadorian Connecticut is half the price. So that's the reality. I mean, the Ecuadorian laborers over there, they're getting paid $3-4 an hour. Whereas in the U.S., it's $15 an hour. And so labor is, 3 times more expensive in Connecticut in the U.S. now. So it's very hard to compete. But there's some very good news here. I got a couple brands and cigars that you might want to check out. One is Brick House by J.C. Newman. And they have this, it's a brick house. It's Connecticut. It's like a brick house Connecticut. It's Nicaraguan filler. And the binder is Connecticut Shade, U.S. Connecticut. And the wrapper is U.S. Connecticut. So Nicaraguan with Connecticut, I think that would be a good smoke. Very good. Sounds awesome. Brick house. With little U.S. flags on the feet. And then another one is the Monte Cristo White series. And this fucking Monte Cristo White Connecticut, they go all out, man. They have a box with fucking photographs of the Connecticut, U.S. Connecticut farms. They got these red barns and beautiful up there in Connecticut. Fall leaves with the tobacco drying in the barns. It's beautiful. Fantastic. And they got the pictures like that on the box. It's Monte Cristo White series. So they're really promoting, hey, this is really special, the place, Monte Cristo White series. And it's a Dominican, Nicaraguan, and Peruvian filler. So, might be something to check out. I haven't smoked one yet, but, sounds really good to me. The GTO Gold, and that's also a Dominican cigar. So might be also one. It says here it's a U.S. grown Connecticut Shade, because when you go shopping, like here's an Arturo Fuente Connecticut, and then you click on that, and you're like, what is this Connecticut? Most of the time they're gonna say this is an Ecuadorian wrapper, an Ecuadorian Connecticut wrapper. So it's not the U.S. Connecticut; it's a different wrapper, and sometimes they don't say it. They just say, this is a Connecticut Shade wrapper. But you don't know, like there's no information. Is this the US one or is this Ecuadorian? Because the taste is going to be different. So you have to really, when you're looking for a US Connecticut Shade cigar, you got to like, read between the lines and be like, is this US Connecticut Shade? And if it is, I would buy some, because it would support their industry, and not let it die. Because the real estate market is just growing in that area, because everything's inflated away, and they're gonna just dump concrete on the whole tobacco fields, if we don't do anything. And that Windsor soil, Windsor soil. That's what I'm smoking right now. I'm smoking the Windsor soil in the Connecticut River Valley. It's beautiful. Awesome. Fresh. That topsoil is feet deep. Not inches. Feet. All that glaciers there used to be all glaciers in that area during the Ice Age. And it scraped that whole bottom area, all this icy, minerals and everything drained right down in there. The soil is rich as hell. Beautiful for growing tobacco. If I was rich, I would buy a huge plot, like, maybe 50 acres in the Windsor Valley. And I would, build a barn and just try, start making some like real quality wrappers. And I would grow these quality wrappers, and I would bale them. Of course, I would dry them and cure them and all that, and then do a fermentation on the leaves, and then I would bale those, and I would bale them inside rum barrels, like Caribbean rum barrels. Maybe like Havana Club from Cuba or something. And that would impart just kind of like a rum aging fermentation into the Connecticut Shade wrappers, which I think would just make a beautiful blend. So that's my idea, man. I wish I had some money. I would invest in this shit and do it, but shit, I'm broke as hell, so I'll never be able to do it. Government saps all my money away from me, so. But I think it'd be a cool idea. Connecticut Shade, just final things here. And this cigar is just really enjoying it, just smoking it slow. And just enjoying the smell in the air is fresh. Really nice cigar. Beautiful taste. Mellow, fresh. A little bit airy. But, yeah, I don't know much about this cigar. I can't remember even buying it. I mean, it must have been more than 15 years ago. And I don't really like these big fat cigars. I like more Lonsdale shapes or Panatellas. But I did hear a rumor that Cuba is buying Connecticut Shade wrappers, actually. And because of the embargo, they can't buy them directly from Connecticut, the U.S., but they're buying it like indirectly somehow. Like the Connecticut wrappers are being shipped to, I don't know, like Puerto Rico or something's going on. I don't know. But the point is that Cuba using Connecticut Shade for their cigars. That would be a fucking awesome mix right there. That would be a blend right there. Beautiful. A Ligero filler of Cuban tobacco with a Connecticut Shade, U.S. Connecticut Shade wrapper. Wow. Nice. Imagine how oily. I mean, if you roll that really well and you get those oils marrying through on something like that, that'd be a beautiful smoke. I got a lot of ideas for sort of blending and all that stuff, but I mean, one thing you could do is you could blend your own cigars together by, like, you know, getting Ramonillones and you know, Partagas and some La Gloria Cabanas, bunching them together and then putting them in a humidor with Romeo Julietas and Monte Cristos, you know, some Cohibas, and maybe like Robino might do it, and make a bunch. You know, you got like different factories, and you're putting them together in one little bundle, and then just age them together, and then that would make your own kind of private blend. You see what I'm saying? So anyways, I would recommend that anybody, you know, to go out and those cigars that I mentioned, just try to pick them up. Let's try to support this industry, you know, bring it back to life, not let it die, by buying some of their tasty cigars, you know. So it's a really good tobacco with a good tradition.